Hello, welcome to Exploring Sunday Scriptures for February the 6th, 2024. These are the scriptures that we will be hearing this coming Sunday, February 11th, 2024, the Sunday preceding the beginning of Lent, which begins on February 14th with Ash Wednesday. And music and meditation then starts on February 16th, Friday, and will be every Friday after that through the season of Lent, 5:30 to 6 p.m. here at Christ Church, and of course live streaming online and available archived after that service concludes every Friday. Short service of contemplative, Taizé-styled centering, music and meditation, as the name implies. So, being the last Sunday before Lent, we're about to start into a study for Lent, which the study is this book, Jesus' Vision for Your One Wild and Precious Life, and then it has here in small print on things like poverty, hunger, polarization, inclusion, and more, by Mark Graves. And we're going to be using this also as the basis for worship, so it will have the opportunity as a study for conversation on Sunday morning. It will be complemented by what we will be doing in worship on Sundays. I also may be releasing short, kind of 20-minute overview of each of the different sections or chapters each week for those who just would prefer to connect with that material online and don't have the opportunity to meet and have those conversations on Sunday morning, or more casually with others. You can always grab that resource on one of your online book purveyors. We do have copies here at the church as well if you're interested in grabbing one here at the church. So that is where we are headed for Sunday mornings. But before we get there, of course, we have Ash Wednesday that starts everything. Prior to Ash Wednesday, we have this Sunday. This Sunday is Transfiguration Sunday. Transfiguration Sunday always is the final Sunday prior to Lent. And the purpose of the Transfiguration Sunday is in some ways to give us a prelude of the glory of the resurrection that is yet to be. So before we move into the season in which both Jesus and his journey is faced towards Jerusalem and what will take place there, we kind of get a hint of where things are headed ultimately. So the final glory of it all in resurrection, with transfiguration. So it sort of sets the hope for us, if you will, to hold fast through this season of challenge and darkness that we will face because of the glory that is yet to be. So it's kind of like a prelude to the season of Easter, almost, with setting us in the right place before we go into the season of Lent. And because of the figures that are part of Transfiguration, we have specific readings from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, that are incorporated into Transfiguration. Of course, the episode of the Transfiguration itself from the Gospel, and in this case, we use the Gospel of Mark because that is the lectionary year that we are in. And then we continue reading from 2 Corinthians, or we continue reading from the Corinthian correspondence. This is 2 Corinthians. We've been reading 1 Corinthians. This jumps to a later piece of that. So let's jump in with the reading from the Old Testament first, so we ultimately can get to the Gospel and explore the Transfiguration a little more, getting ourselves ready for this Sunday. So this is 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out of Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The company of the prophets who were at Jericho drew near Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Be silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went, stood at some distance from them, and they both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water. The water was parted to the one side and to the other until the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I'm taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You've asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me as I'm being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not." And as they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and of horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. So we have in some ways, and if we continued reading, we'd see how Elisha then takes up the mantle of Elijah. So this is sort of a symbol of the prophetic role, the place of Elijah, and heads back across the Jordan, now serving sort of functionally in the same role or significance that Elijah did. Elisha is Elijah's protege. It gets very confusing as their names are extremely close. Elijah versus Elisha. And this time has come, is well known, that Elijah's prophetic work is coming to a conclusion. And based on his faith in what he has done, there has been a foretelling that Elijah would ascend directly into heaven. And so this is that day where it's going to happen. And as they journey along, Elijah keeps trying, I don't want to say to leave behind Elisha, but basically to say, "Why don't you stay here? I'm going to go on ahead." And that's to give him the ability to depart, to ascend as has been promised. And maybe this is because, or a sign of, Elijah's own challenge in the sense of leaving behind his protege. So his own attachments to the world and to somebody that he cares for very deeply, is to have some space from him will allow Elijah to set his sight on God and heaven and release himself from those things that are binding him to the earth. That could be an explanation for why he keeps trying to leave Elisha behind and go on himself. It's interesting in some ways conceptually. I certainly pastorally have seen this play out as people reach the end of life, and often for some, their final moments of life are only after every family member has come through, made their goodbyes, and then in moments where nobody is around, the final moment actually takes place. It's almost like having said the goodbyes and now not being bound by those connections, or having them right there holding vigil, permits the individual to release themselves into God's care. So I sort of see a parallel in my own pastoral experience. Maybe you also in your family have such experiences as well. Anyway, they go through these various places where there are people that tell Elisha, "Hey, this is going to happen today." And Elisha has his own challenge with accepting that his life is going to be without Elijah. And so he keeps saying, "Yes, I know this is what is supposedly going to happen today, but just be quiet. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to think about it." And they go through several places that are important. You can look up their importance. I don't want to go into the significance of each one of these places, but Bethel, Jericho, and the Jordan. And the Jordan is, of course, the river that is crossed over following the journey through the wilderness with Moses into the promised land. The significance of the parting of waters, may have a number of different implications. One of them certainly would hearken to what we remember of Moses striking the Red Sea with his staff and it parting, and the Israelite people walking through on dry ground. This could also be a sense that this doesn't represent a second entry into the promised land, and so they walk across on dry land because they've already journeyed into the promised land once, so it's not a return, and so there's a difference between that. It also is going to provide the evidence when Elisha crosses back over that he now has assumed this significant role, and alongside of that, certain capabilities, as we see with Elijah in his using his mantle and striking it and having the waters part to the sides. So Elijah's journeyed as far as basically he can. And in order to set his sights upon God in this ascension, he then asks Elisha sort of a final question. What is it that I can do for you that'll allow you to let me go? And Elisha says, let me basically have the same capabilities, that same connection to God, the same spirit, he says, in you, and maybe even a double portion. So please let me inherit a double share of your spirit. And that may be hyperbole in a way, is he's just trying to say, I want to have the same fervor in me, that same spiritual anchor that you have. And so give me double what you have, because I'm so feeling like I'm not capable or lacking now, that if I had double what you have, that I might have a sufficient amount to overcome what I'm going to face. And Elijah says, okay, well, if you see me as I ascend, then your wish will be granted to you. So you've asked a hard thing, yet if you see me as I'm being taken from you, it will be granted. If not, it will not. And then we have Elijah swept up. Now, what's the significance? If you see me, then you're going to have it. If you don't, you're not. Maybe this is just Elijah providing something for Elisha to focus on. And so it gives Elijah the ability then to set his mind on God and what's about to happen, and Elisha some sense of, if I focus on Elijah, if I see him as he goes, then I'm going to be okay, then everything's going to be okay. And we have this then chariot of fire and separation between Elijah and Elisha, and a whirlwind into heaven, and when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. Now, again, if we read beyond this, we see that he takes up his mantle and he seems to have inherited the capabilities that Elijah has, this prophetic role. He now assumes that role. But in this moment, so he's seen him ascended, so perhaps again, he's given him something to hang on to. And in giving him something to hang on to, it's going to also reassure him that he has the abilities that Elijah has already cultivated within him to take over this role that Elijah has himself been playing. The rending of garments is just a way of expressing personal anguish. This is still a significant human loss for Elisha. He is losing his mentor. For all intents and purposes, this is as much a parent in his life as anything, and certainly a spiritual parent as well as a vocational parent. And so it greatly emotionally takes a toll on Elisha to have his mentor now not in his life. And so before he walks back across to take on now the responsibilities that are his with Elijah no longer around, there is this moment where he is very much just in his emotional place of mourning, of loss. And that's kind of where we end this, but he has experienced that. So Elijah plays a prominent role in transfiguration. And so that's why we have this presence of Elijah. And there is a sense within this that preceding the Messiah's return will be Elijah's return. He's one of the only individuals who didn't go through death, but upon the conclusion of his life, immediately ascended into heaven. And because of that significance, has the capability or is seen as one who will return to usher in the time of the Messiah in the end. So that's why there is a connection to Elijah's ascension. Is it has to do with the significance of him and ultimately his presence to showcase that this is the time of the Messiah and this is the Messiah. All right, let's switch to the reading from the New Testament, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 through 6, before we finally get to the Transfiguration. And I spent quite a bit on that Old Testament, so I do want to get to the Transfiguration pretty quickly. Here's what Paul writes there in that correspondence with the church in Corinth. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not proclaim ourselves, we proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Now, interesting, you have a whole lot of light referred to here. And technically, these Sundays that we are in are charted as the Sundays following Epiphany. The second Sunday after Epiphany, the third Sunday after Epiphany, we get to Transfiguration. Yes, we're in the green Sundays of Ordinary Time, but really we don't call it Ordinary Time until after Pentecost. And so these are the Sundays following Epiphany, which still has that significance of Epiphany's light. And so having this scripture focus on light so much as what's in here. The gospel being veiled, the God of this world blinded the minds of darkness to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel. Well, Transfiguration, part of that has the light that surrounds Jesus changed. And it's a further illumination, as we first had an epiphany, of the person of Jesus, of who he is. So by the light of a star, we have the revelation, as Jesus is an infant, of what will yet come, as well as his true identity, known by outsiders more intimately first than insiders. So we have Paul saying in the early church that we become inheritors of this same light of Christ. For we don't proclaim ourselves, we proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, ourselves as slave. For it is God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give light to the knowledge. So it's this sense of that same light, that same transfigured reality that is observed in Jesus, seen at the rising of his star, observed in his transfiguration, and ultimately experienced intimately in resurrection, comes to dwell in us. And so how is it that that light shows through us, through what we know and through what we do? And so this gospel is plain. And if there are those who do not know it, this is the beginning of that. Even if our gospel is veiled, it's those who are living in the darkness, who are unwilling to open their eyes and see this light. All right, let's shift into that gospel, because that really is the priority of Transfiguration Sunday. This is the Gospel of Mark chapter 9. So we've skipped way ahead. From the Transfiguration on, the focus turns towards Jerusalem. And so we were just at the call of the disciples and the earliest teaching and miracle. So of course, jumping all the way to the end now, we skipped a big middle piece, which we come back to after Pentecost. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. And they were coming down the mountain. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So as I said, a prelude to the ultimate glory of Christ in resurrection, setting the groundwork now. So let's unpack this a little bit here. So we have Jesus taking with him Peter, James, and John. So that's Simon Peter and James and John, the brothers Zebedee. He's leading them up to a high mountain. Anytime we have high mountains appear in the biblical narrative, it should ring a bell that something significant is going to happen. There are these places that particularly in ancient times were seen as sort of intersections between earth and heaven. And there are a lot of significant moments in the biblical narrative where encounters with God happen on mountains. So going up to a high mountain should kind of make an alert go off in our minds that something is going to take place. They're going to this place, this region, this high point where earth and heaven kind of come together, and so something's probably gonna take place there. And so it's just those three and Jesus. So four of them in total. They get up to this high mountain, and it just says, and he was transfigured before them. So he was changed. And then we have sort of descriptions. Well, what did this change look like? Now think about when you're trying to explain something unexplainable. And so we have a lot of descriptors here trying to explain to us what this transfiguration looked like. So we have dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. So, we might think of it as glowing or radiated light. Now remember, the Corinthian correspondence with all the light there represented. Light and darkness are constantly interplaying among the biblical narrative. And of course, we have light as the first creative act. And so this way that illumination and light continues to play into the biblical narrative as part of the experience and revelation of God. So we have this transfiguration having with it this light, this way in which illumination seemed to emanate from Jesus. And appearing alongside of this transfigured Jesus, this one that seemed to be illuminated, were Elijah and Moses talking with Jesus. Now, scholars contend that what this is trying to encourage the disciples to see, and us who are readers of this occasion, is that Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets, Jesus represents the fulfillment of both. So it's sort of carrying on the lineage of that which has been the story of the Hebrew people in their journey with God through the law, through the guidance of the prophets, and ultimately now through the vindication of the Messiah, the fulfillment of the law and prophets in the Messiah. And the response to seeing this, these three, they're talking. We don't know what they're talking about. It doesn't tell us what they are talking about. So we have Jesus transfigured, two other individuals showing up and talking with Jesus who are identified. Now, how the disciples knew who they were, maybe it was the conversation, maybe there was enough sense as to how they had shared through the years features of these individuals. Hard to know, but it seems to be that they understand that this is important and that these two individuals are Moses and Elijah. And so we have a very quick response. Peter is always overzealous in the sense that he jumps to conclusions, jumps out of the boat at one point. And so before really kind of taking account of everything that was going on, decides that being able to just stay in that environment, in that experience, in that spiritual moment was was what he desired. That here we are having this intimate encounter with God, represented in law, prophets, and the fulfillment of that in Jesus. Let's just stay in this place, in this encounter with God. And so how Peter expresses that is, let's make some permanent dwelling places, some places to make this somewhere that we can remain, and that particularly that these three can remain, for Moses, for Elijah. And it says, he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. So again, they don't know how to make sense of what they are experiencing. And so Peter, rushing to a conclusion, decides, I want to make sense of this situation, so let's spend some time here. This is obviously an encounter with God. Let's buckle down. Let's dwell here. And immediately what happens is a cloud overshadows them. Common on mountains in high places that you have clouds that often obscure those highest points. And a voice in that cloud, this is my son, the beloved, listen to him. Now, this is my son, the beloved, is also something that has been said or spoken before in baptism. And I think I said when we looked at baptism that according to Mark's gospel, it is unclear whether that's just spoken to Jesus and he is the only one who hears that, or whether others hear that as well. And it seems like from Mark's gospel, it's just Jesus. Well, now we have that message being extended. What's the significance of that? Well, we've had the transfiguration of Jesus, then the appearance of the one who represents the law and the one who represents the prophets, so showing that lineage and the fulfillment in Jesus. And now you have the confirmation by God of that identity. So you have sort of what visually you've taken account of to be able to kind of add it all up. And now you have in voice, in word, the confirmation of that truth. This is my son, the beloved. But one of the things that I really appreciate about this is it's not just a confirmation of the identity of Jesus. There's an instruction here. Listen to him. And I think this is one of the key pieces of transfiguration, that we get so caught up in admiring Jesus, in worshiping Jesus, that we forget to listen to Jesus. And that is the instruction of God in this moment of transfiguration, is that we shouldn't get so caught up in simply worshiping or admiring or remaining in one place spiritually, but listen to Jesus in order to grow ourselves. And then all of a sudden the clouds lift and they're all alone, just with Jesus. Moses and Elijah are gone, no more voice that's there. And they head down the mountain. And Jesus says, I don't want you to tell anybody about what this experience has been until later. Now, why would Jesus say that? There is a continued desire for Jesus not to have miracles or people come to confirm his identity as Messiah because of the word of mouth of somebody else. If that comes through personal experience, the healing ministries, the teaching ministries, the direct encounters with Christ, that's different. But to get it by word of mouth is not the way that Jesus wants anybody to have their faith come to be. And so that is a piece of it. But I think that the other significant piece is we have Peter who recognizes this divine moment up on a mountaintop. And the very next thing after we have listened to him is them going down the mountains. And I think for me, part of the significance of that is we have moments of epiphany, of the lights going on. And it would be wonderful to stay in those moments. And for many of us, they are unique by setting and moment in our lives. They sometimes happen on mission trips, or we go to unique moments of worship, big worship services or holy days, and we have these times. But those mountaintops are rare and few and in between. And so what we are called to recognize is that ministry really exists. Our journey with God really exists in the valleys, not on the mountaintops. That we may have our direct encounters with God, on the mountaintops, but we are called from those direct encounters to take that experience and live them in the valleys. So I think the interplay of environment here is an important illustration about our journeys with God and where it is that we are called to take our experiences and to live them out in the daily. So little bit, I guess, I hope this has gone pretty long for one of these on Transfiguration Sunday. I hope that gives you a little sense as to the significance of Transfiguration Sunday and appreciation of the scriptures. Please go back and check these scriptures out again. Read a little bit on either side of them to give you a little more of their context, to see what happens directly before, what happens right after. And I think you'll find your experience of worship really gets enriched by spending this time with the scriptures, but also returning to them once or twice prior to our gathering for worship on Sunday. So scriptures, 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 through 6, and the Gospel of Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. We'll see you in worship this week for the Transfiguration of the Lord.